Today we're going to be talking about evolution, or as I like to put it, evolution.
This time on Debunking Creationists, I wanted to take a break from the claims of purported scientists and look at the claims of your average guy. Meet this dude, Alan Horvath, or should I call him by his previous stage name, Alan J. Post.
I'm the dude, so that's what you call me, you know?
A singer-songwriter and traveling troubadour since the early 70s, who now makes YouTube videos mostly about Bible teachings. But this one is about how evolution is wrong.
The theory of evolution it's in trouble. It's always been in trouble. It's an indisputable fact that the ongoing growth of biological knowledge continues to produce evidence that contradicts this theory.
Really? That's a bold statement. I wonder if he can back that up with scientific literature.
I've got information, man.
No, of course he can't. Try it yourself. You can search PLOS One or PubMed, which are online journals of peer-reviewed scientific research, or any others like it. What you will find are tens of thousands of evidence-based articles supporting and advancing the theory of evolution, and zero refuting it. The creationism sites Horvath seems to be reading do not count as science, because they all freely admit that any evidence that contradicts creation cannot be valid.
But there's always been a group of highly distinguished scientists with impeccable credentials and no religious motivations who have declared that evolution has never been proven and that it is nothing more than a theory.
Yeah, all right, man. I mean, there are a lot of facets to this, a lot of interested parties.
This is a strange argument to make. The vast majority of scientists in all the related fields agree that evolution is real. But of course, why go by the majority when a tiny minority agrees with your dogmatic belief? And that minority is all religious, despite what Horvath says. I have yet to find any scientifically qualified person who rejects evolution, who is not a religiously motivated creationist. Not one. And in contrast, millions of religious people actually accept evolution, including 58% of Catholics, according to polls. So the bias is completely on the creationism side. But to be clear, science does not work by authority, but by confirmed evidence. I'm not making an argument from authority. Horvath is. What any scientist says means nothing, unless they can back it up with evidence, which others can verify and test.
Now, the first big problem with evolution is that the fossil record increasingly does not support it. The theory of evolution claims that there once existed a whole series of successive forms of the various organisms which are alive today, and that they supposedly changed by infinitesimal amounts with each generation as they evolved into the present varieties. So, the fossil record should show these gradual changes, but it doesn't.
On the contrary, the fossil record does show changes over time. The earliest layers of strata contain only the simplest forms of life, and the later layers show the gradual emergence of new varieties of these earliest forms. In vertebrates, for example, we see a progression from primitive fish-like creatures to jawed fishes, then amphibians, then reptiles, and finally mammals and birds. But no, we don't expect to have a record of every tiny step. The process of fossilization relies on a very rare chain of favorable circumstances occurring. An animal must die and be buried by sediments quickly before significant decay can occur, and before being picked apart by other animals. Then, those sediments must remain undisturbed for a very long time to allow for the slow process of permineralization, which slowly replaces the organic tissue with hard minerals. Then later, geologic processes such as erosion must allow the fossil to re-emerge near the surface, but without demolishing it so that we can find it. Because this scenario is so unlikely, the fossil record is not a detailed species-by-species view of the history of life. In fact, only a small fraction of the species that existed in the past have been preserved. Rather, it is a series of snapshots in time, which do show the unmistakable progression of forms, each building on and modifying earlier forms, but with small and sometimes large gaps in between. But despite the gaps, we do have more than enough fossils to show the progression of most animal lineages, including the significant transitions, and they are always found in the expected chronological order of strata. I've already shown one excellent example of animal transitions shown in the fossil record, the evolution of whales from land mammals, in my last video on Jerry Bergman. Another great example is the transition from dinosaurs to birds. Fossils show that small carnivorous bipedal dinosaurs, called theropods, evolved into today's birds. Just like birds, theropods had hollow bones, a lightweight, bird-like skull, a wishbone, and talons on their back feet. But unlike birds, they had short front arms rather than wings, and sharp serrated teeth. Imprint fossils show that many dinosaurs did have feathers, which are actually highly evolved scales. They initially were soft, billowy feathers along their arms and tail, which were very good for keeping warm. Later theropod fossils, such as the famous fossil dubbed Dave, had feathers from head to toe which were more structured, like those of birds. The fossils also show how their arms turned into wings, but they retained jointed fingers and remnants of claws in them. The bones in their hands, shoulders, pelvis, and feet became reduced and fused together. And there are many other examples of fossil sequences that show how animals changed gradually from one form to another. To say that fossils don't support evolution ignores tons of evidence.
Instead, fossil records show the sudden emergence of new species coming out of nowhere, fully complete with all their characteristics and not changing over time.
These statements make no sense when you understand evolution.
Come on, man, I'm not trying to scam anybody here.
No fossil comes out of nowhere, with the exception of the Cambrian time period, when nearly all the existing phyla first emerged in their most basic forms, and the ancestors of those were simply too soft-bodied to fossilize. There are no fossils found that are so unique that they defy classification within the known phyla, and are not obviously related to and descended from other species. Rather than coming out of nowhere, they all obviously came from more primitive ancestors. And what exactly does he mean by fully complete with all their characteristics? Of course, every animal is a complete animal. Do they expect to find animals with half an eyeball or half a leg? Apparently they do, but that's not how evolution works. All structures in animals evolve gradually from earlier forms, and often the functionality of the structures changed as they evolved. For example, fossils show that fish fins gradually evolved from providing locomotion in water into legs and feet that became capable of walking, first in shallow water, then eventually on land. And if you don't think this is possible, take a look at the mud skipper, an amphibious fish which can swim in water and walk on land today, just as the early ancestors of terrestrial vertebrates, such as Tiktaalik, once did.
This is popularly known as the problem of the missing link, and it's massively systematic across different species and time periods. Strangely enough, this problem is getting worse for evolutionists, not better.
The missing link of human evolution has not been missing for decades. I wonder where Horvath has been for the last few decades.
Nobody likes to ride alone.
Oh, right. Well, he obviously hasn't been reading science journals, because we have found several different fossil species of hominin apes. The most famous and the most compelling of which is Australopithecus afarensis, known by the Lucy fossil, a 40% complete skeleton, and hundreds of other fossils. Lucy shows exactly what we expect from a transition from primitive apes to humans, with numerous traits shared with each form. Most significantly, an ape-like skull, but human-like upright walking characteristics. Creationists deal with this evidence in three ways: pretend it doesn't exist, as Horvath did, claim it doesn't show transitional features, which it clearly does, or claim it is fraudulent, for which they have no basis. All three reactions show how desperately creationists don't want evolution to be true, and they are committing the fallacy called moving the goalpost. They asked us for a transitional fossil from humans to apes, and we found exactly that, and they rejected it. It's not good enough. I'm beginning to think their belief system is not based on facts.
Well, I thought you might know that, man.
If humans evolved stage by stage from the ape, then why is it that we still see apes on the earth?
It's amazing to me that every armchair creationist eventually comes to this question. If we came from apes, why are there still apes? As if it was a question that science cannot answer, or reveals a fact that somehow science missed. It really shows that they are willfully ignorant, as this question is asked and answered on a daily basis on the internet. All they have to do is look.
You know, this could be a lot more complex. I mean, it's not just, it might not be just such a simple, you know?
The answer is, of course, that humans did not evolve from the apes that are around today, but rather, today's apes and humans share a common ancestor. So the question is equivalent to asking if Americans came from Europeans, why are there still Europeans? Evolution usually works in a branching pattern. Generally, when a portion of the population of a species migrates to a new area and becomes genetically isolated. The two populations may now evolve differently, becoming different species, and can change at different rates. Some branches of the tree may go extinct, others may split off new branches, while still others may stay largely the same.
And since there are still apes on the earth, why is it that there are no existing animal forms that show the intermediate developmental stages that were supposed to occur between the ape and the human? I mean, if we evolved from the ape in intermediate stages, you would see some of those on the earth. You only have the ape and then the human. There's no logic going on, and yet people buy it because they're taught to buy it. The more we investigate, the more we keep finding the same forms over and over again, never the intermediates.
As I've shown, we do have examples of intermediates between primitive apes and human apes. They just happen to be extinct, such as Ardipithecus, Australopithecus, and Homo erectus. And no, we do not keep finding the same forms over and over again. We actually keep finding new forms, new members of the human family tree, such as the recent discovery of Homo naledi, for which we have over 1,500 fossils of 15 individuals found in a cave in South Africa in 2015. The human family keeps expanding with new discoveries, some of which may be our ancestors and some are likely our cousins, on a side branch of the evolutionary tree. Basically, everything Horvath said about fossils and transitional forms is factually wrong.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
Nope. Everything I said is backed by peer-reviewed scientific literature.
Now, another development that's undermined evolution is the spread of computers into evolutionary biology. Basically, computers have shown that the neat evolutionary trees that get computed are in fact based on imaginary relations of similarity and difference, which are due more so to the human mind's tendency to perceive patterns than they are to the raw biological data itself.
Horvath gives no sources for this claim, and it is pretty vague, so I'm going to have to guess what he's actually talking about. There are a number of creationists that are saying that the tree of life has been invalidated. The fact is that the tree of life has become much more complicated with new discoveries, yes, but it has not been invalidated in any way, and is still conclusive evidence that all species share common ancestry. After Darwin, this hierarchical tree of commonality was shown to be due to the fact that all animals share common traits because they inherited them from a common ancestor. And this is the only explanation that makes sense. And with the discovery of DNA, that fact was even further confirmed, particularly because related species even share DNA that is not functional, such as pseudogenes and endogenous retroviruses. This only makes sense in an evolutionary model. Why would an intelligent designer copy and paste broken, useless stuff from an ape to make a human? But the more we learn, the more we see how complex the tree of life is. And genetics was able to correct some errors in the tree that was originally based on morphology. And while you can accurately trace lineages using DNA genes, we have discovered that in some cases, computer-generated phylogenies can produce different trees for different genes. You might think that this is a big problem for evolutionary theory, as creationists surmise, but it's not, for the simple fact that we already know about horizontal gene transfer, discovered in the 1950s. Horizontal gene transfer occurs when genetic material is transferred from organism to organism in any other way than reproduction. It can occur in a few different ways, such as transformation, in which cells of different organisms come in contact and simply merge some of their genetic material, or transduction, in which genetic material is transmitted via a virus. With bacteria and other prokaryotic microorganisms, horizontal gene transfer occurs frequently, and because of this, the tree of life for these microorganisms is much more web-like, and their interrelationships are more complex than just a simple hierarchy. But horizontal gene transfer also sometimes occurs in eukaryotic multicellular animals, such as us. In fact, 8% of the human genome came from viruses. So, for certain genes in animals, when you use computers to generate phylogenetic trees, they don't exactly match up with the family tree of common inheritance known from morphology. But scientists have long been aware of this, and use techniques to combine computer phylogenies of different genes, multiple genes at a time, and other genetic markers to come up with the most likely family tree. This does make the tree of life more complicated, and somewhat more web-like, but it is still a tree, and still shows how creatures evolve from earlier forms. No biologist thinks this invalidates common inheritance in any way. This is another example of creationist cherry-picking. They point to the exceptions and give them special credence, while ignoring the valid reasons for these exceptions, and ignoring the overwhelming evidence that does clearly show that evolution is real. And does an intelligent designer adequately explain the common designs we see in animals, as creationists claim? Absolutely not, because we only see traits that stem from evolutionary pathways. We don't see gills on penguins or seals, for example, which would be advantageous for both, since they spend most of their time in the water, and they are both much better adapted to moving in water than they are on land. We only see the structures which are able to evolve gradually from earlier forms.
And there's yet another problem with evolution that continues to get worse. And that is that it remains incapable of explaining how anything could evolve that doesn't make biological sense when it is incomplete. For example, there is one classic illustration among many others that we could point out, and that is the wings of birds. What good could only half a wing be? This is a problem that the theory of evolution has promised to solve for a very long time, but never has.
Hasn't that ever occurred to you, man?
Yes, of course that occurred to scientists. But the question has long been solved. We do know how a wing could form gradually. What good is a partial wing? Well, a partial wing may be bad for flying, but it might be good for doing something else. As I already mentioned, we have evidence that the therapod dinosaur ancestors of birds had feathers. And we even have evidence that they warmed their eggs with their feathered forelimbs. But how could those forelimbs become wings used for flight? Scientists have for a long time considered a few possibilities. One is that fast-running theropods could jump into the air and use their feathered forelimbs to gain gradually increasing height. Another possibility is that they were able to survive falls from greater and greater heights, and eventually were able to glide down, as their wings increased their ability to catch the air. Birds much prefer to be in trees or on cliffs than on the ground, because height offers safety from ground-based predators. The same was likely true for their small theropod ancestors. An example of a tree-dwelling animal transitioning to gliding can actually be seen today in so-called flying squirrels, which don't actually fly, they glide, and also their marsupial cousins, the sugar gliders. These mammals are well adapted for gliding from tree to tree, or from tree to the ground, but cannot actually fly. This is likely very similar to how bats, also mammals, gradually evolved flight. They have a webbing structure they use to fly rather than wings, similar to that of the flying squirrels, but more advanced. But new research has revealed another strong possibility for the evolution of bird wings. At the University of Montana, biologist Ken Dial was studying bird flight and noticed an interesting behavior. Young birds that cannot fly very well yet can use their wings to help them climb up trees. Many trees do grow at an angle, providing varying ramps that the birds can walk up. At the shallowest angles, the young birds can just walk right up. But as the steepness of the angle was increased, the researchers discovered that the birds used their underdeveloped wings to help them, not by actually flying or even propelling them upwards, but by helping them keep pressed against the branch as they climb with their feet. Dozens of species of birds were tested, and all of them could do it, even when the angle was increased to 90 degrees straight up. You can easily see how natural selection could have caused the short feathered forelimbs of theropods to get longer, stronger, and more agile, which provided more efficient and steeper climbing ability. And forelimbs that can do that can easily make the transition to flying. So evidence shows how wings could have started as insulators, adapted to tree climbing, and then adapted further to full flight capability. This changing of function is called exaptation, and it applies to many other structures in animals as well, and provides an apt answer to how natural selection could have caused the development of structures that appear to be specifically designed for their current purpose. The increasing steepness of the tree ramps is a good analogy for how new structures can evolve, gradually, with small improvements, providing increasing enhancements to capabilities, and sometimes leading to new abilities. There are many other examples we can show of exaptation, such as fish fins becoming adapted to walking. There are no examples of structures that could not have evolved through adaptation or exaptation, so this objection to evolution simply does not hold water.
Hey, careful, man. There's a beverage here, huh?
And another point to make. has us looking to the Shamayim and the planet Mercury. Scientists have discovered that Mercury has the highest density of all the known planets other than Earth. In fact, Mercury is so dense that it's thought to have an iron core occupying some 75% of its mass. This incredible density has generated much agitation and confusion with evolutionists who believe that Mercury cannot possibly be anywhere near as dense as it truly is. That is to say, they refuse to accept the truth about it because they would have to admit that their theory, and by the way, their entire life's work, is a complete joke. After decades of struggle, most of them have given up and have admitted that Mercury's high density cannot be explained by, and in fact completely destroys, evolution's theory of slow and gradual development. And so, what did they do about that? Instead of admitting the fallacy of their theory, they propose a long ago catastrophic collision. And what is their evidence for this theoretical collision? They have none, except that Mercury would otherwise disprove their theory and their life's work, so there was another explosion. Yeah, that's it. There was an explosion.
Wow, Horvath is really reaching way out with this argument. And at first it seemed like a new one to me.
You guys aren't privy to all the new shit.
But really, it's just a new spin on the God of the Gaps argument. Scientists can't explain this, therefore God did it that way. One might wonder, what purpose does God have for creating Mercury in the first place, let alone in making it very dense? But that's beside the point. What Horvath is really trying to show is that Mercury proves that the solar system is very young, and therefore evolution could not have occurred. This is absurd. Mercury is not young, but even if it had formed just a few thousand years ago, that would prove nothing about the age of the Earth. With the tremendous number of independent lines of evidence we have that the solar system and the Earth are billions of years old, it's absurd to think that proving a single planet is young could overturn that.
Well, yeah.
But let's look at his claims about Mercury anyway. Mercury's proximity to the Sun has made it very difficult to study, and many mysteries remain, but we have sent 2 probes to it and learned much about it in recent decades. First of all, no scientist ever thought that Mercury could not possibly be as dense as it is, as Horvath claims. In fact, for decades there have been a few possible explanations for this fact, all within the realm of plausible science, and none of which require a supernatural agent. These include the removal of silicates from the crust of the young Mercury by a giant impact, or by evaporation caused by the hot solar nebula. Without closer investigation, scientists just aren't yet sure which is the correct cause of Mercury's density. There is tremendous evidence that major collisions have occurred, particularly in the early solar system. And in 1994, we saw that they can still occur today, when comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 broke up and crashed into the planet Jupiter. So planetary collisions are not just something they made up, as Horvath claims. As data from the NASA Messenger probe, which circled the planet for 4 years from 2011 to 2015, continues to be analyzed, the actual cause may become more clear. According to some astrophysicists, the collision hypothesis is the most likely explanation, given the data we currently have. Unlike religion, science waits for convincing evidence before coming to firm conclusions. This is a strength of science. Creationists, like Horvath, like to paint it as a weakness.
Anyway, little old Mercury gives evolutionists another hard pill to swallow. For a planet to be billions of years old and still have a magnetic field, there must be fluid motions within the planet's core. That is, the core itself must be molten. But as one evolutionist says, Mercury is so small that the general opinion is that the planet, in effect its core, should have frozen solid eons ago. And so, according to evolutionists, the core cannot be molten, and therefore evolutionary theories must conclude that Mercury cannot have a magnetic field. But, oh well, it does. Even they admit that any attempt to include Mercury in their evolutionary models can only doom their models to failure. And, once again, their life's work, what do they do about that? It's over with. So we see that this tiny, seemingly insignificant planet creates an enormous stumbling block for those who wish to deny the creator of all things.
Scientists did expect Mercury's core to be frozen solid due to its small size. But the Mariner 10 probe, launched in 1973, revealed that Mercury does have a very weak magnetic field, about 1% the strength of Earth's. But a planet that small, and as old as the solar system, was expected to have a solid core, and magnetic fields are caused by liquid cores. So how can we tell if the core is solid? Using the famous Arecibo radio dish in Puerto Rico and other radio telescopes, scientists were able to detect Mercury's rotation rate and noticed that the spin rate fluctuates slightly over the course of its orbit. The size of these fluctuations indicate whether the core is completely solid or partially molten, and the fluctuations were found to be larger than the expected rate for a completely solid core. Planetary geophysicist Katherine Johnson at the University of British Columbia explained that if there was just a little bit of non-metallic stuff mixed in with Mercury's metallic core, then it would have a lower freezing point, and could therefore remain partially liquid for billions of years. Furthermore, the NASA Messenger spacecraft detected ancient magnetized rocks in Mercury's crust. The most likely cause is that the rocks were once magnetized by the planet's magnetic field, and due to the amount of impact craters and how strongly the rocks were magnetized, researchers concluded that Mercury's magnetic field was once much stronger in the past and diminished over time, but has persisted for 3.7 to 3.9 billion years. So Horvath's claims about the planet Mercury pose no problems for the age of the solar system or for evolution. Science is a constant search for answers, and while many mysteries have been solved, many mysteries remain. Carl Sagan said, "We will not be afraid to speculate, but we will be careful to distinguish speculation from fact." To suggest that when scientists speculate, they are somehow covering up that they really don't know anything, as Horvath did, is dishonest and wrong. Science works by forming hypotheses, testing them against the available evidence, searching for more evidence, making accurate predictions of what evidence we will find in the future, and attempting to find evidence that falsifies the hypothesis. The science of evolution has repeatedly passed this kind of scrutiny for over 150 years, and there is so much confirming evidence from several different independent areas of science that the only rational conclusion is that evolution is a fact. Creationism passes none of this type of scrutiny, has no confirming evidence, fails all tests, fails to make accurate predictions, and is actually disproven by the evidence. And also, it doesn't even qualify as a hypothesis, because it offers no explanatory power. How the Creator made everything is never explained, and is nothing more than magical thinking, imagination, and adherence to ancient, disproven myths. Believers like Horvath accept creation on faith alone, and then try to tear down confirmed science because it conflicts with their beliefs. But notice how they only object to the science that conflicts with their dogma, but are, for the most part, perfectly fine with the germ theory of disease, science-based medicine, and the many forms of technology that make our lives better and safer, which all come from the same scientific method. And notice also how it is only the religious that object to evolution. The bias in their thinking is painfully obvious. I really hope that creationists like Horvath will watch and learn something from these videos, and at the very least, will stop spreading misinformation about science, because that's not good for anybody. But that may be asking too much. Thanks for watching.
I'm sorry I wasn't listening.